Hello everyone, it's a left-handed lady. Today coming at you with our September plan with me. We're going to jump right into it. This month's theme is going to be mushrooms. I just really like the painting and the style that I can get into when I'm painting mushrooms, so I just decided to go with it, and it kind of comes with the jumping into fall color scheme. So we're going to use my Winsor & Newton watercolor palette like we used last week, and just a few brushes. I will have all the supplies listed down below. I'm going to mix up some yellowy brown to start off with a couple of the stems. And like I said before, this is not watercolor paper, so it's not going to look as good. That's why I'm going to work really fast with each color and each layer, because it doesn't blend very well once it seeps into the paper. This is just a note for all of you bullet journalers out there. Remember that your bullet journal is not watercolor paper, but you can achieve the same style with markers if you wanted to, or even colored pencils. I've done that before. So I'm going to use that same brown color on about 3 of the different mushroom stems, and I'm going to switch out to a darker and then a lighter brown, switch up the different color pattern on each of the mushrooms. Keep it interesting. Like you can see here, I'm adding some white to that color and just lightening up quite a bit. It doesn't show up as much lighter on this camera, but in real life it's quite a bit of a different color, and it really does give that dimension that there are different types of mushrooms in this scheme. And there I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it, brighten up a little bit to do my smaller mushrooms. And you can play with this, do whatever color mushrooms you want. You could go with more of a gray toned base, and that would give you more of an unsaturated color. I like the saturated look that I'm going for in this piece, but if I was doing more of a realistic mushroom style, I would do more of a grayish taupey brown. That's a little bit more realistic, but we're not really about realism in this show, are we? And there I'm taking a little bit more of a reddish brown and doing the rest of my stems. So as you can tell here, there's a slight variation in color through all of them. Now on this one, I kind of went bold and started with just a straight dark brown, and then tried to blend it out with that reddy brown looking color, and I didn't move fast enough, so it's not as pretty of a gradient as I wanted, or it would have been on watercolor paper, but it still worked. And this 160 GSM paper actually holds up really well to the watercolor, so I am able to manipulate it some, just not as well as watercolor paper would allow you to. So if you're recreating this just as a piece, not in your bullet journal, I do recommend you use watercolor paper. I actually made a piece similar to this on watercolor, and it turned out much better because the blending is just a little bit easier. It's a lot subtler and more fluent with the paint moving easier on the page. So now I've mixed up my vibrant orange that I have in this palette and taking a little bit of brown and a little bit of yellow to unsaturate it just slightly. And I'm doing the top part of this mushroom. I'm going to do, I believe, 2 mushrooms in this color, or 3, I believe. 3 mushrooms in this color. And I'm making sure that I have enough paint mixed up for all 3 mushrooms so that they're very similar in color and they look coherent as the same type of mushroom. Now I'm going straight back into that vibrant orange again and deepening up that color that I already have made and doing the underneath of the mushrooms to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. Looks a little darker because there's pieces under there. And as you know, mini mushrooms split as they're growing. So I went ahead and drew that darker orange upwards into the base of the mushroom so that it looks like it was opening up and you could see through the inside. I really like the way that looked, and I'm going to do that on some of them and not on all of them, just to make it look a little bit more natural. Now for that smaller mushroom and the detail, I'm switching to a much smaller little fine tip brush to get that detail really smooth and really, I didn't want any bleeding on that smaller mushroom. It's so easy to switch brushes and it makes such a big difference in the different sizes of your piece. So don't be afraid to get one brush dirty and then another one as well, because they're watercolors. It's in the name. Just wash it with a little water. That's why this is one of my favorite mediums to work with. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix up some of the yellowy tones mixed with a little bit of that orange that I already had on that palette to do more of like a muted yellow, green, orange color. It's showing up very gold and vibrant on this camera. I believe my saturation's a little too high. I'll fix that for the next video, but it actually is a very muted, like, I don't know how to explain it, a very orange toned yellow that's a lot more muted. I added more orange to that yellow and did the underneath part so it's a little bit darker, and I really like the way this one turned out. These colors blended a little bit easier. I think I went a little too strong with the orange on the other mushrooms, a little bit too stark of a difference, but I like that yellow mushroom the best, I believe. I'm going in with that same technique. I'm going to take my smallest little brush and go in on these little groups of mushrooms at the bottom that are very small. I'm using that darker color, and I'm going to go ahead and go in with it first, just because I don't want the smallness of the details to be lost in the yellow that's going to go on top. So I went ahead and laid those down so that they can dry, and then I'm going to go back in with that brighter yellow and go in on top of it. So I'm kind of working backwards on the smaller ones versus how I did it with the bigger mushrooms. Gives you a little bit more room for error, I guess, on this way, because you can cover up any mistakes with that brighter yellow as you go. You can kind of tell how much slower I'm going on these smaller ones. It's really important that on the smaller ones you use a very light hand, a very controlled hand, because it can get so messed up so easily. And with a smaller object that you're painting, the bigger the mistake can be. Even if it's a small mistake, it's going to show up a little bit more because there's not much detail to them already. So as you can tell, these are taking me a little bit longer than the bigger ones, but that's okay. I don't mind. I get lost into my paintings. So now I'm going to take that red that's in the palette, and it's a little bit too dull of a red that I want. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of orange, not very much, just a little bit, just to brighten it up a little bit. And then I'm also going to mix a little bit of the white into it, just a tiny bit, to make it a little bit less vibrant, but I wanted that vibrant color with a little bit of less saturation. And I'm going to go into the top parts of my remaining mushrooms. Can't speak. This is great. Just like we did with the ones before. And like you can tell, I took a little bit too long of laying that one down, and you can see the streak lines in it, and that's what I'm talking about with this paper absorbing it super quickly and making it really hard to move around. So you need to move quick and with not much water, so you don't buckle the paper, but enough water to where you don't leave streak lines. So now I'm going to take that red that I have mixed up, and I'm going to add a little bit of my red brown to it and make it a lot deeper of a color. And I'm going to draw in the undersides of my mushrooms, and on these mushrooms I'm going to put little spots on them with that darker red. Make the spots willy-nilly. Don't try to make them the same size. Don't even try to make them perfectly round, because these are mushrooms. I don't think I've ever seen a mushroom with perfectly round spot all over it, or even symmetrical spots. So try to get out of your OCD and do it as random and natural as you can. It's going to make it look the best and the more realistic. Now that we've got all of our mushrooms laid down, we're going to take a round pointed brush and go into, I have 2 greens in this palette. I'll list them down below, but I took the brightest green and went ahead and started and just flicked upwards with my pen at different stages, different angles, to start making the grass bed that they're growing in. Now I'm doing it very sporadically. As you see, there's lots of space in between each of them. It's not perfect, because I'm going to go in with a different colored green on top of that, and then another green on top of that to blend it all together and make it look very three-dimensional. What I can say with the best advice I can give you for doing grass is be very light with your hand and almost loose with the brush. Kind of let it flow off of the page and flick upwards. Gives you the most natural look, and the weight variation in your hand will give a blade of grass a lot more curve or edge to the point. Makes it look a lot more realistic. So now I'm taking that more mossy toned green, it's a little bit less saturated, and going in and just doing this all over again. I'm not even really focusing on the holes. I'm just doing basically the same thing on top. And just wherever it lands, it lands. That fills it in a little bit, gives it a little bit more depth to it. So now I'm going to take a mixture of both of those greens that I used and then a little bit of brown mixed into that to deepen it a lot more, make it a much more muddy colored dirt or grass color. And I'm going very lightly with this one throughout, kind of bringing it downwards, and then I am using that color to smudge it out at the bottom. I wanted the bottom to be very plain, almost like the grass is only growing around where the mushrooms are. At first I was going to leave it white. It seemed unfinished, so I drug that color down, and I like the way it turned out. You could continue the grass stroke all the way down, but in a journal it's very hard to get that flick at the edge of a piece of paper because there are so many other pieces of paper below it. So work with what you want, do it however you please, but I would love to see your recreations of this, because there's so many different ways and interpretations that you could take this style and make it your own, and I would love to see them in the comments below. And once I let that dry, I'm going to go in and erase my September and go in with a brush pen and just a muted peachy color and write September. And then I'm taking my like auburn red color and doing 2020. And I'm just doing a little like shadow outline. It's like a broken up outline. It's not really outlining the whole thing, but it does make it pop off the page a little bit more since this is such a muted tone color. Now, unfortunately, with my hand being so heavy, I did kind of smear things, so I went ahead and went over to the next page and let it dry for a little while before I wrote the quote on the quote page. So we're going to go straight into our tracker and our events page. I really like the setup that I did last month, so we're carrying this over to this month. I may go back to the big calendar spread later in the year, but for right now, this is working really well for me. So just at the top to fill in the spaces and keep the theme going, I'm going to add a couple mushrooms. I'm not going too overboard, but I did want to incorporate that, so I kind of moved my title over a little bit and added some small ones underneath the other title just to really tie that all into it, because I'm going to be using Tombow brush pens as my colors instead of these actual watercolors, because I'm not going to crack my watercolors out every time I need to write in my journal. So I wanted it to be coherent, but also flow into the fact that I'm using my Tombow brush pens as my colors for this month. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So like I did before, I'm going in with that brighter red and the darker red underneath to give you that depth of the underneath of the mushroom. And I actually forgot to add the dots. So now that I'm watching this through, I realized I didn't put dots on those red ones. So they're just red mushrooms, which I'm okay with. It's just a little odd that I forgot to do that. So same techniques, same thing that I'm doing, just a smaller version on this page that I did on the cover page. So now that we've got that done, we're going to let that dry a little bit, clear off our stuff, and we're going to move on to our Tombow brush pens. Now I've picked up a muted green, a peachy color, a red, and a brown for this theme. It's very fall inspired colors, but it also goes really well with the mushroom colors. So that's what I'll be using. I'm going to highlight my trackers vertical with these colors, and then I'm going to label each day horizontally with these colors. So it's a little bit different, but same color scheme, same kind of thing that I did last month, and it really works out. I like having these all on one page, easy to flip to, easy to manage, and with the limited amount of things that I have to do now, it all fits on one page and it works out really, really well. So if you're not familiar, this is my tracker spread, and it's divided into 30 days horizontally and my 6 habits that I like to track vertically. And I'm just going to use my Sharpie pen to outline this whole spread and fill in the vertical lines, or vertical and horizontal lines, just to separate each section further, even though the coloring already kind of does that. Now I'm just going to tell you, this is the most time-consuming part of each spread, is any kind of grid layout that you're going to lay out, drawing the lines repeatedly. And I'm such a perfectionist, I have to sit there and line up my ruler perfectly every time, and I make sure I do a double pass, make sure my lines are really thick and bold. This is something that so many people look at and they're like, oh, that's so tedious, I don't need that. Well, if you don't need this, then don't put it in. That's what's so wonderful about a blank journal, being able to fill in whatever you need, whenever you need it, adjusting it to your needs, your wants, your life, your schedule. Many people don't want to track things like I do, like my water intake or my mood or how many hours I work, because I don't get a pay stub. I like to track those, but there's people like my mother or a good friend of mine who don't need to track anything, and they feel no need for this spread, which is perfectly fine. It's so easy to just do this calendar spread, smack a quote painted on the other side, and you've got a 2 spread beginning, and it's super easy, quick to start setup. I'm just going to take those same colors that I used on the front ones and highlight horizontally each of the days, so that they each have their own color strip. It's very easy to clarify which color is what day, that kind of thing. It makes it very easy and quick for me to go in there and just, oh, I gotta work this day, write it down. Oh, Miranda's got a volleyball game this day, or my mom's got a doctor's appointment. There's all these kinds of things. It's so easy and quick to lay down in this kind of spread. And I've got it broken down into 3 vertical columns for morning, midday, and evening. And that is just like phenomenal. Being able to set up your spread, being able to write weeks ahead when I'm going to be doing things, and not have to figure out spacing inside of a little box that I normally do. So I'm really liking this setup, and y'all let me know down below if you've done this or if you switched over to this at all and how you like it. Because so far, I'm sticking with it. It's working really well. Just going down the left side of each of these spreads, filling in the date of the week as well as the day of the week, so that I know where I am, what day it is, and what date it is. So if I make an appointment there, it's like, oh, it's on the 3rd, I can find the 3rd, but I can also be like, oh, I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I can just go in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and pick it out. Very easy to follow, maybe takes a little bit extra time to set up, but honestly it saves you so much time in the long run. Now I'm going to take a black brush pen because I didn't want to oversaturate the color, and I really wanted something darker and more in your face for these title headings. So I went ahead and strayed away from my colors and went to black brush pen and outlined those headers. So now that our cover page is dry, we're going to flip back over and take the fine point part of our Tombow brush pen and write out our quote for this month. And my quote for this month is, "Be somebody who makes everyone else feel like somebody." And I think this hits home really hard because sometimes I struggle with being like, well, who cares? Who cares about little old me? And I feel like there's a lot of people in this world who feel that same way, and we need to share them a little bit of love. And it's always good to bring other people up because it brings you up as well. And that's my little tidbit for this month, and I hope that all of y'all can get something out of that. And that's pretty much our completed spread. So we've got a September with mushroom theme, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. I will see y'all next time. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and never stop creating.